that I find very compelling is the fact of the a lot of the out-of-body experiences and the after-death or near-death experiences, the NDEs. There's been a lot of stories that I've seen, heard, read about that are so similar, and they seem so personal to the person. And I'm not talking about a dream. I'm talking about things that people have experienced that they wouldn't be able to experience unless they were there, but they were actually out. Different accounts from neurologists during brain surgery that the patient in no way would be coherent. Not only could they not hear anything, they wouldn't be able to speak or see because they had all the blood drained out of their brain. And her name was Pam Reynolds. Was that one account? There were books written about her experience. She, in detail, she described the drill they were using on her and the sounds and the things around her, like she was hovering almost over the bed. And things that, you know, the doctors were interviewed, and they said there's no way that any of that can ever happen, and they were just mortified. They were thrown back by the whole situation. And there are a lot of accounts like this. It's not just, you know, I just saw a light. It's more like I saw what was going on around me. I was able to float into other rooms, saw what people were talking about, and they confirmed with those people that things were true. What do you guys have to say about that?
Okay.
Thanks for calling, Keith, and we're gonna take your call off the air. You want to go first?
People have been claiming that kind of stuff for a long time, and yet for some reason it's not those kinds of claims are not making a dent in the scientific understanding of life and you know, how the brain works and so on. So you know, I haven't done those studies myself, but it's just like when I get my plumbing done, I go to a plumber. When I get my science done, I go to a scientist. And to my knowledge, scientists are not buying it. So I don't know what the specific problems with those claims are, but I'm going to go for now on the assumption that there are some, and you might want to take a much closer look at the refutations of those claims.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to claim that I'm familiar with these in detail, but while you were talking, I looked up the name of the person you were talking about and found a fairly long article on infidels.org by a guy named Keith Augustine called Hallucinatory Near-Death Experiences, where he talks about this stuff. There's also something on the Skeptics Dictionary, that's skepdic.com. There's an entire article on out-of-body experiences. And basically there's a few things that you can say about that sort of thing. One is the human mind is kind of weird. You know, things... you know, people have what they consider to be extremely vivid experiences, and even the memories of other people who you explain those experiences to can be sort of twisted around to match your experience. Like, you know, I'm a big fan of the movie Memento, where the guy basically thinks that, I mean, you know, it's a big exploration about how memory works and how people convince themselves retroactively that something really happened exactly some way when it's actually just part of a story that they told themselves in their heads. I mean, bottom line is this person may have believed that she viewed things that couldn't possibly be explained, but then, you know, a combination of lucky guesses and people retrofitting their memories to match what she said, it's not all that far outside of the explainable, especially when you think about how many people claim out-of-body experiences that don't have so much evidence, or supposed evidence. Somebody is bound to get lucky sooner or later and have some surprising seeming coincidences happen. That's just probability.
Yeah. And I'll add, you know, what we do know about the brain and how it works does not allow for actual out-of-body experiences. You know, I mean, that your nerve impulses get carried through nerves in your body. Those nerves do not extend out of your body, enabling you to have your consciousness out elsewhere. And so on the one hand, what we do know about the brain doesn't allow for this. The other thing is, there's not big mysteries about the brain that require something like a separate spooky soul to explain them. So we don't need to, to postulate such a thing in the first place. The only mystery here is how come there are so many of these stories, but there can be a lot of explanations to that other than, well, there's actually souls, even though, as far as we know, the human body doesn't really need them in order to be alive and think and stuff.
Right. I'm going to go straight from that to another guy. Ed in Buenos Aires, Argentina, says that he's had out-of-body experiences, but still thinks they're an illusion and knows why.
Interesting.
Ed, are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to have really high fevers, like when I was 6, 7 years old, and I would get a lot of hallucinations. Like I would see people, I would hear voices, I would see monsters. Once I saw a giant dragonfly, and I would tell my parents, like, listen, I'm seeing these things, right? And they would say, like, no, you're imagining them. I was raised a skeptic and an atheist, and I think that helped a lot. And when I was a teenager, I started having out-of-body experiences, and I would feel like I was being connected to this whole spiritual thing, and I would sense presences and stuff. And at first I was like, wow, maybe there are spirits, maybe this is like the real thing. And I started to question it. Since I was an atheist and a skeptic, I started like, okay, how can I prove this? How can I see if this is real? And I trained myself to be able to have out-of-body experiences on demand. And I would do things like I would hide a card, pick it out at random, and just throw it in the living room or whatever, and try and fly there and see what card it was, or try and contact, the spiritual presences that I felt. And obviously, every single experiment I ever did failed miserably. And I think that's something that nobody does. I've talked to people who have had out-of-body experiences, or who claim that they prove that a soul exists or something, and they haven't really done anything with it. I mean, I did a lot of work with it, and I can tell you, I mean, I know the feeling. You feel like you're with a community of people. You feel like someone greater is there and everything. And it's just a feeling. It's just the same thing I used to have when I had a high fever and I would listen to 3 voices talking to me at the same time. Or when I would imagine everything moving much faster. It's just a part of the brain that gets crazy for a bit, whether it's because of stress or fever, or it's like a graphics card. When it gets hot, it starts doing things it shouldn't do. And whatever, that's my experience. I wanted to share it with you because I know that a lot of people call and say like, oh, whatever, I had this out-of-body experiences. How can you explain that? Well, I had them too, and you don't need to believe in them. You can test them, you can try and do things with them, and you'll see that they're just illusions.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Ed.
Yeah,
and
thanks for
I gotta
calling.
say, the card thing was awesome. I mean, not very many people would think to do that, would have the
Yeah.
presence of mind to say, I wonder. I mean, he didn't go at it by saying, oh, this is definitely not spirits. He went after it with the point of view, like,
If it's
it
true,
could be
then
spirits.
this should
Yeah.
work.
Right.
Right.
And he tried it, and it didn't work, and then he used that to disconfirm the theory, which is exactly what we were talking about earlier.
That's science. And one of the things we do know about the brain and how it works is that there are parts of the brain that generate things like our sense of location. And all you need to do to account for this sense that you're not in your body is something has misfired in your brain. Mm-hmm. By the way, there's a great short science fiction story by one of my favorite science fiction authors, Craig Egan, I forget the name of the story, but the premise is the main character has a very specific kind of brain injury that gives him a permanent out-of-body experience. Like he walks around and sees himself from outside.
Oh, weird.
And he's always from a certain position. And then he discovers that, like, oh, the things that he sees that are outside the field of vision of his actual body are imaginary. So as part of his field of vision is real stuff that he can rely on, and part of it is an approximation that he's making up from what he can see through his eyes. It's a science fiction story, right?
Yeah.
But exploring the concept.
Sounds like a good story.
Yeah,
I liked the also the analogy of the wonky graphics card, because
Yes,
I had a bad graphics card once, and what would happen was that periodically funny patterns would show up on my screen, like sparkly things or like light bursts that would come from a particular point.
Yeah.
Like there would be some wedges on my screen,
Right.
And things would get very colorful, and you would see things. I mean, you know, this is just a piece of hardware designed to show us
Right.
you know, reliable stuff about the internal state of the computer, and it was going wrong.
But what would never happen, no matter how wonky it got, is the processing that's going on in your computer here would not suddenly start going on over here in space somewhere outside of its circuitry.
That's true.
Which is what we're being asked to believe happens in out-of-body experiences.
Yeah. So we're, I guess, 40 minutes in, and I think it's a good time to mention that we will not be going to Thread Guilds this week. Instead, we will be going to El Arroyo, 1624 West 5th Street in downtown Austin. So I'm sure we'll stick with that for at least a few weeks, so make a note of it. And we're going to go on to Spencer in Salt Lake City. That was me. Turn down your
I can't hear
sound.
you. I could hear you a second ago, but okay. So here's basically it. I live in Utah, where all the Mormons live. Most of my extended family is Mormon. Half of my immediate family is Mormon. My brother's a returned missionary, and unfortunately, he got back from his mission. He was here for a few days, and then he went back home to Indiana. And the problem is, I don't know how to, I'm an agnostic atheist, and I don't really know how to communicate with him or to open the lines of communication about things like this, because he lives across the country, and I don't really know how to talk about this thing. And I don't want to proselytize to him or anything, but he spent 2 years proselytizing to others, and I just want to know how I can talk to him about these kinds of things if they come up. And it's because that's basically my question.
Okay, thanks.
Wow. That's hard to say without knowing a lot more about where both of you are, you know, coming from and what your relationship is. Russell, you've probably got less experience with religious family members than I do.
That's true. I've got some experience with religious in-laws, which has been a miserable failure.
Oh boy. Ooh, let's start there.
No, I don't want to start there. But my experience with atheist evangelism, so to speak, a term that I've used in the past, is you really can't wrap up your ego in the idea that you're going to convince one person to change their mind. It's a nice bonus if you can pull it off, but overall, it's rare that people make a big jump to, like, you know, a fundamentalist Mormon or whatever you would call it. Oh, by the way, I think we're running out of calls, so if you could put the number back up there, that would be a pretty good idea, probably. Let's see. But, I mean, if you want to talk one guy around, you're pretty likely to be frustrated. That's not to say that you can't have a conversation with the person, but I would say that you should approach it with the point of view that you're going to educate yourself better about what this person really thinks. Because the process of arguing with somebody who's really convinced of something mistaken is self-educational, I would say. You can learn the kind of arguments people would make, and then when you take a while to think about what's wrong with those arguments, then maybe you can turn around and have discussions about this from a little stronger knowledge base with more